Okay, in the interest of a speed and only having to go through one video clip versus making 4 separate videos, I'm going to string together the morning talk shows from CBS, from MSNBC, from ABC, and from Fox. Now, full disclosure, Rudy Giuliani got on here, and he had a segment on CBS. Afterwards, on a separate show from that was on Fox this morning, they interviewed him, and he was screaming blue flippin' murder about not having a chance to come back on with the CBS panel when the head of the, I guess, NAACP legal fund got on and basically lambasted him. I mean, he was crying a sea of tears. I didn't get a chance to record it. It's probably going to show up on their website, and I will go look for it. Chances are, though, it's not going to be there. So anyway, you're going to see just 2 interviews, and then I'm going to string together all of the morning news clips. So here we go.
And we're back with the head of the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks. Mr. Brooks, we've this morning in words, context, balance. President Obama said things aren't as bad as they were in the 60s in terms of race relations. Do you agree with that?
Well, there are many in this nation who are tempted to believe that the glass is half full of despair and half empty of hope. What we might note, and what we should note, is that the country is full of the capacity to affect change. We have thousands of young people, older activists, in the streets of this country. They're in the streets of this country protesting and demonstrating because they believe profoundly that they can bring about an end to police misconduct. That is an affirmation of who we are as a country. It's an affirmation of our capability as a country to bring about reform, and it speaks to the character of our country and our fellow citizens. So that's a good thing. That is to be celebrated. So race relations have improved, but they are not where they should be, particularly when a young black man is 21 times more likely to lose his life at the hands of the police than his white counterparts. And a young, an unarmed African-American man is 7 times more likely to lose his life at the hands of the police than his white counterparts. Clearly, we are not where we should be. We are better than we were, and because we are better than we were, we have the conviction that we can be better still.
Talk about the police. There are obviously some bad actors, and they are captured in these horrendous videos. But everybody on both sides is saying, don't paint the other with a broad brush. Help people understand how to talk about the changes you think need to be made in the police force, but then also respect these people who are brave and take risks and serve their communities.
Sure. So we're at a moment in this country where we have to be morally surgical. We have to be precise. So in other words, we understand that what fuels racial profiling in this country is that African Americans are seen as being black skin, being a robe of, I should say, a cloak of suspicion, white skin being a robe of protection or respectability. We have to get beyond presumptions, beyond stereotypes. And that also applies to police officers. There are police officers who step forward. There are police officers who are supporting a reform in the ranks. We have to stand with them. In other words, those who honor their badges, who honor their oaths, we need to support. But we need to be clear. This is a moment in this country that is one of urgency, where you had 509 people who lost their lives at the hands of the police this year, 990 last year. We are at least 24 people ahead in this grim calculus. We've got to address this problem because we're at a moment where we know what to do. The president has issued his recommendations from his 24th Century Policing Task Force. The NAACP issued a report called Born Suspect. We have police departments that know how to get it right. We just have to develop the will to get it right.
What are the things? Give 3 things people need to know that need to change to improve the situation.
At the federal level, passing the End Racial Profiling Act, to the Law Enforcement Trust Integrity Act. At the state level, passing racial profiling laws, body cam laws, and dash cam laws, and establishing civilian review boards. The point being here is we know what to do legislatively, we know what to do from a policy perspective, but at the end of the day, John, to bring about the kind of change we need to ensure that every demonstrator is a voter, and that we show up en masse and in the millions at the polls in November. Because we need to bring about reform at the state and municipal level and at the federal level, and of course, call upon our presidential candidates to take racial profiling seriously and address it in their party platforms and in their campaigns.
All right, Cornell.
That we have to do.
Cornell William Brooks, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we'll be right back in a moment.
All right, this is the segment with Rudy Giuliani, and I scanned social media, and there is like severe outrage on the interview that he did this morning, and also one he recently did on MSNBC, which is basically, it's ridiculous. But let me just, I'll play the particular interview, and then I'll make some comments at the end of this particular interview, and then I'm going to string together the various panels that went across mainstream media.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. With us now is former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, I want to ask you about something former Speaker Newt Gingrich said, which is that he said white Americans can't understand the extra risk that comes with being black in America, and that whites instinctively underestimate the danger of the black experience. What do you think about that?
I agree with that completely. I agree largely with the sentiments of Congressman Elijah Cummings. The reality is we have to look differently at race in America if we're going to change this. We've been looking at it the same way for 20 years, and here's where we are. And we both have to try to understand each other. First, let me say my deep sympathy for the people of Minnesota, people of Louisiana, people of Texas and of Dallas. And I'd like them all to remember that although these incidents happen in different ways, they all share it together as Americans. And we share this violence together as Americans. So maybe whites have to look at it differently and blacks have to look at it differently. Whites have to realize that African American men have a fear, and boys have a fear of being confronted by the police because of some of these incidents. Some people may consider it rational, some people may consider it irrational, but it's a reality. It exists. And there's a second reality in the black community. The second reality in the black community is there's too much violence in the black community. So a black will die 1% or less at the hands of the police and 99% at the hands of a civilian, most often another black. So if you want to protect black lives, then you got to protect black lives not just against police, which happens rarely, although with tremendous attention, and which happens every 14 hours in Chicago.
Now, he wants to make Chicago appear to be the norm throughout the country, which is a bunch of bullshit, but I'm sorry, let me let him finish.
Every 14 hours, and we never hear from Black Lives Matter. Well, so if you want to deal with this on the black side, you've got to teach your children to be respectful to the police, and you've got to teach your children that the real danger to them is not the police. The real danger to them, 99 out of 100 times, 9,900 out of 1,000 times, are other black kids who are going to kill them. That's the way they're going to die.
So, Mr. Mayor,
now on the white side, we have to understand that whether we get it or not, there is this extraordinary fear of the police, and police have to institute a policy of zero tolerance, like we did for crime in New York. Zero tolerance, no disrespect. Way back 14 years ago, Commissioner Howard Safer began a program in New York City called Courtesy, Professionalism, and Respect. It was continued by the next 3 police commissioners, including the one you just had on now.
Mr. Mayor, let me just ask you, you start off by saying that white Americans have to understand that this is happening in the black community, and then at the end you said members of the black community have to teach their children to behave in front of the police. That those messages seem to conflict with one another.
Of course they don't. If I were a black father and I was concerned about the safety of my child, really concerned about it, and not in a politically activist sense, I would say be very respectful to police. Most of them are good. Some can be very bad, and just be very careful.
And so what do police...
I'd also say be very careful with those kids in the neighborhood and don't get involved with them, because, son, there's a 99% chance they're going to kill you, not the police. And we got to hear that from the black community. And what we got to hear from the black community is how and what they are doing among themselves about the crime problem in the black community. When there are 60 shootings in Chicago over the 4th of July and 14 murders, and Black Lives Matter is non-existent, and then there's one police murder of very questionable circumstances, and we hear from Black Lives Matter, we wonder, do Black Lives matter, or only the very few black lives that are killed by white policemen, but not all those black lives that are killed by other blacks? And on the black side, what they hear from us is constantly defending the police. Now, I'll give you an example. I had a police officer who brutally attacked a gentleman named Amadou Diallo. That police officer is now sitting in jail for 25 years.
Yeah, and do you know why that guy is sitting in jail for 25 years? Because the black people in New York raised such a furor, and it was so much political pressure, and once the videotapes were released that showed exactly what happened, you guys had no choice but to prosecute that guy. I mean, the guy should have basically just, as soon as he was charged, just pleaded guilty. That's how much evidence was against that guy. So you cannot take credit for claiming you prosecuted one police officer that the goods were in on him. That's a bunch of crap. Now, the other thing is, notice this host for Face the Nation, he doesn't know how to break in. He needs to, I guess, take a look at Chris Matthews or Chris Wallace on how to break in to ask a question, because that was the last question that he got to ask.
Due to the work of my police commissioner, Howard Safer, and the prosecution of now Attorney General Loretta Lynch. I also had police officers who were wrongly accused and acquitted by a jury, even though mobs were calling for them to be put in jail, despite the fact that a jury found them not guilty. So these are complicated situations, and we have to try to understand each other.
Just because juries find people not guilty, that doesn't mean that the guys weren't guilty. That just means that the juries basically didn't take a look at the evidence with their own eyes. And that happens all the time. Case in point, Rodney King, you see a zillion cops beating the crap out of him, but the jury to criminally convict the officers of, I mean, they just beat the crap. Everybody pretty much knows what happened with the Rodney King case. But they had the trial up in Simi Valley, which is Police Officer Home 101. There was no justice there. So I don't want to hear about a jury basically finding somebody not guilty. Now, I will say that at least it did get to a jury, because the majority of the cases out there don't even get an indictment, let alone get to a jury for a trial. But anyway, let him finish out his rant, because...
Just a final question, sir. You said that the Black Lives Matter movement has put a target on the back of police officers. When members of the African American community see videos as they have this week, they feel like there is a target on young black men. Explain your response about how they put a target on police officers, how that can match up when people see these videos.
Well, when they talk about killing police officers.
But they don't.
When they sing, well, they sure do. They sing rap songs about killing police officers, and they talk about killing police officers, and they yell it out at their rallies, and the police officers.
Mr. Mayor, what you seem to be doing is taking.
Please let me finish. And when you say Black Lives Matter, that's inherently racist.
Well, I think there are
Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter, Asian Lives Matter, Hispanic Lives Matter. That's anti-American, and it's racist. Of course Black Lives Matter, and they matter greatly, but when you focus in on 1% of less than 1% of the murder that's going on in America, and you make it a national thing, and all of you in the media make it much bigger than the black kid who's getting killed in Chicago every 14 hours, you create a disproportion. The police understand it, and it puts a target on their back. Every cop in America will tell you that if you ask him.
All right, Mayor Giuliani, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, see, and that's Mayor Giuliani. He was almost shaking there. I thought he was going to start spitting, but no, Black Lives Matter don't put a target on every police officer's back. The targets that get placed on police officers are those who are bad cops and commit crimes against not just black people, okay? They commit crimes against Hispanics and white people as well. But because the focus of the Black Lives Matter movement is targeted towards protection of black people, which is needed, these guys go crazy. That's just, and the analogy I'll make is cancer, because there's a cancer out there, and that cancer is in the form of the criminal justice system. Okay? Now, you got some bad judges, bad DAs, and bad cops. Because the Black Lives Matter people decide to focus on the cops, that's just like saying, well, there's cancer out there. And there's cancer of the esophagus, cancer of the colon, etc. Because the cancer of the esophagus is not as big a deal as the cancer of the colon, but you have doctors that concentrate on the cancer of the esophagus. You're basically saying that they shouldn't do that. They should go concentrate on cancer of the colon because it's a bigger deal. No, that's a bunch of bullshit. Anyway, let me flip into the into the CBS panel first.
Joining us now for more discussion on blacks and policing, Sherilyn Eiffel, head of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund, Terrence Cunningham, president of the International Association of the Chiefs of Police. We also welcome Wesley Lowery of the Washington Post to the broadcast and thank him for coming in at the last minute when DeRay McKeeson was arrested. And finally, our Justice and Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues, who is not only covering the story for us, but is working on a book due out next year called Black and Blue: Aggressive Policing, Racial Tension, and the Crisis in American Law Enforcement. Chief Cunningham, I want to pick up where we left off with Rudy Giuliani. Does every police officer feel like they have a target on their back?
John, what I think I would say is that today this is probably arguably the most difficult time in American history to be a police officer. A couple of points. First of all, I mean, the police officers that are out there on the street today, they're worried about active shooters, they're worried about HVEs, they're clearly worried about the racial tensions that we see, and the tensions are clearly palpable. But I think that the point that's lost on a lot of people is the breakdown that we have in a lot of the social systems. From mental illness, untreated substance abuse, homelessness, joblessness, all gets laid at the feet of those police officers. So the officer out there today has to deal with those issues, and then they still have to do their day job, which is responding to calls for service, particularly in the inner city, with gang violence, the rise in violent crime. And I do think that as Commissioner Bratton said, it's a very difficult time to be a police officer, and the mere fact that you're out there in uniform, I do think that there's a target on those officers' backs.
Just to get clarity here, you named a number of things which are large societal, cultural things, and when you talk about being a target, it seems different than what Rudy Giuliani was saying, which was that Black Lives Matter has put a target on those police officers.
I wouldn't make that connection. I wouldn't say that it's Black Lives Matter that put a target on those police officers. I think that some of the rhetoric that we're hearing out there, and unfortunately, I think people have really polarized this issue. If we really want to work towards solutions, we need to work together. The IACP has been working a lot with the federal government. We've worked a lot with the White House. This isn't new to us. We've been working on this for a long time. I think that we stood up an Institute for Community Police Relations. In the fall of 2014, we had a summit on police relations. We had all the civil rights folks there. We had the NAACP, the ACLU, ACLU. We had members of the community there. We had members of policing from around the country there to discuss those issues, and then we published actually a summit report that came out of that. So we're continuing to try and do that, and I think just about every person that you've heard on your show today, John, that talk about police training, I think that's what IACP has done. We've tried to support that, whether it's fair, and that's what we've tried to further.
Chairman Knuckle, your response to Mayor Giuliani before.
Well, I hesitate to make my response all to Mayor Giuliani because, you know, part of what we're really confronted with today is the needs of 21st century policing and law enforcement. And Mayor Giuliani not only has a 20th century vision, but he actually presided over one of the most discredited areas and periods of policing in the city of New York, which is in fact responsible for a lot of the tension that exists between police officers and people in African American communities. The reason it's so difficult for young African American men, for all of us sitting here today, for police officers, is because of what has been revealed in the last 2 years. But what has been revealed in the last 2 years has been the reality in African American communities for decades. It's very convenient to talk about Black Lives Matter because people now know those three buzzwords. I lead an organization that has been at this for 75 years. And my predecessor, who founded the organization, Thurgood Marshall, dealt with the issue of violence of police officers against young African Americans. So this has now been revealed to the American public, largely because of cell phone videos that have allowed people to actually see what's happened. And now we're in this period of tremendous tension when something has been revealed that was formerly concealed. What can we do about it? Well, now we can't pretend that there's some golden age of trust between African Americans and police that we want to return to. If we're honest with ourselves, we're getting ready to do a new thing. We're creating a policing that never existed before. We're trying to create relationships that never existed before. We're trying to create trust where it never existed before. And what's required to do that is to take a fresh look at what it means to be a law enforcement officer in the 21st century. It means being able to open up communication to communities of color, not to lecture them about how they talk to their kids. Parents of African American men and boys are scared to death of their children's encounter with police and encounters with criminality. That happens every day. From every church pulpit, every Sunday, that's what's talked about. In community meetings, that's what's talked about. So when I hear this stuff about, black on black crime and that I heard Mayor Giuliani saying, come into our community, something he has never been quite good at doing, to be perfectly honest, be in our churches, listen to our conversations, attend our rallies when we talk about peace in our own communities.
Rudy Giuliani was hated by the black community when he was mayor of New York. He had the good fortune of becoming mayor of New York in 1994, where that 1992 crime bill was really taking hold. And what he basically did was he basically suspended the civil rights of the black and Hispanic people in the city of New York. And at the same time, the crime wave that had reached its peak in 1992 was starting to come down, and in 94 had really started to come down. So he's going to try to claim that he saved a lot of lives, but he didn't do jack. It was really the crime bill, together with him suspending basically the rights of black people to move about freely, that really caused a drop in crime. But that same drop in crime occurred all across the country. So he's trying to take credit for the crime rate dropping when it really wasn't, he really didn't have a lot to do with the drop of crime in his city or across the country. And you add together the fact that the economy took a major uptick, and I do mean a major uptick under Bill Clinton. More jobs, better economy equals less crime, and he was the benefit of that.
Leslie, let me ask you about DeRay. You've been in touch with his his friends. Give us an update on what's happening.
So DeRay McKesson, the activist who's broadly linked to the protest movement, who's still in custody in Baton Rouge, where he'd been protesting and demonstrating in solidarity. As of a few moments ago, he's still in custody. There are rumors that perhaps he may be released by noon or by 1, but that had been 3 a.m., that had been 4 a.m., and that had been 7 a.m., and so who knows what will happen at noon. You know, what we know from watching the video of his arrest, as well as some of the context, was that him and a group of other activists were walking up the side of essentially a highway on the shoulder, and officers were saying, don't cross into the street, don't cross in the street. Based on the videos we've seen, it does not appear that he or anyone else had crossed into the street, but kind of suddenly he was taken into custody by officers who arrested him. That's not unlike, you know, someone who's been on the ground covering many demonstrations in many cities. That's not something that is not unique necessarily. I've seen people picked up on the street that way many times, activists and otherwise.
Chief, let me ask you a question just about this. You're not here to defend the Baton Rouge Police Department, of course, but give us a sense from your perspective how these things play out, because one of the things in talking to activists and police is that they have to find a way to accommodate these kinds of protests. They seem to be doing that in Dallas before shots rang out. Is there a new model for how to handle these high-tension moments where you have a situation like what happened last night?
Now, first, I think I would say that as long as any demonstration is peaceful, the police are going to be there to support that demonstration. When it turns from a peaceful demonstration to a riotous type of behavior, or a behavior where the crowd gets out of control, and then they have to change their tactics. But I think that I would point, John, as you said, right back to the Dallas Police Department. I think the Dallas Police Department did an incredible job. That night when they were there, they were protecting those demonstrators and those protesters' First Amendment right to assemble and to free speech. People talk about this guardian versus warrior, role. I think that was a complete guardian role that they were in that evening. And then when you watch as those shots started to ring out, those officers started to drop, you saw officers running towards the gunfire to protect those protesters. They had no idea they were the ones being targeted, the police were being targeted. And then you saw other officers actually putting themselves between the bullets and the protesters. They were human shields to protect those people. And I think that can't be lost on us. I mean, that was a perfect example. And it didn't matter. I saw white officers, I saw black officers, Hispanic officers, males, females. It didn't matter who they were or what they were. They were there to protect those protesters. And I think that's what's important for people to know across this nation.
All right, we're going to pause right there. Jeff, I'm going to start with you when we come back about what solutions may be happening. And we're back with more of our panel. Jeff, you've been out in the street, you've been reporting this story over time. What's the state of things, and are there places where the relationships are getting better between the community?
Well, I think there are places, big cities, small cities, where relationships are improving. There has been an effort since Ferguson to increase community policing, increase the diversity of the police force. But there's still problems that remain. John, we're coming up on 2 years from Ferguson, and based on what I've seen going out into Chicago, and I was in Chicago without a camera, just an iPhone, recording what people are saying, interviewing people there over the Memorial Day weekend, knowing that would probably be a tough weekend for Chicagoans. And what I found is the underlying problem is still there. There remains this lack of trust. And I don't know if you increase community policing, that's not going to address the problem. And that's why we are where we are today.
Why isn't it going to address the problem? Because everybody, you hear them just say community policing, it's like body cameras. It's a word that gets thrown out, and we don't really. So tell us why it's not working.
Well, we heard what Mayor Giuliani said, and I think that if you talk to people in the communities, and certainly if they hear what he just said, as the mayor of Dallas said a couple of days ago, words matter. And I think based on what he was saying about black families, it shows that he has, and I'm sure some of the interviews, if he were to go and talk to some of the people there, it just shows a lack of understanding what the root of the problem is. There is a history of mistrust between the black community and law enforcement, and that's at the root here. And 2 years out from Ferguson, that still has not been addressed. And so you're not going to get to the root of the problem until you address that issue, and until people like Rudy Giuliani go to these communities, actually talk to the people who live there, and get a sense for what they really feel and what's really at the root of the problem.
Which seemed to be what Newt Gingrich was saying in his quote. Wesley, you wrote about the Dallas Police Department.
Of course, I've written about the Dallas Police Department in a piece in today's Washington Post about the reform efforts there.
Yeah, why was it working in Dallas?
Well, and working is still relative, right? We're talking about a relatively low bar because what we know is that no police department has this perfectly, and that we're still working to overcome a long history of these issues, right? But what had changed situation, in part in Dallas, was that things had been so bad. Dallas in the 70s and 80s was known as one of the worst departments in the country as it related to these shootings. Some very horrific shootings and killings that had happened. In response, there had been some attacks at police officers as well. And over time, you had both the election of black local officials who started to come in, whether that be in the mayor's office, eventually who placed some black police chiefs in, including the current chief, district attorneys, judges, but you also saw a shift in some of the ethos requiring some level of accountability if and when an officer commits a crime, or if and when an officer is involved in a shooting. But one other thing I want to say is that, so I work on a team for the Washington Post that covers fatal police shootings full-time, right? We've been studying this for 2 years, and I think that our inability to move forward with this conversation is largely based on our inability to grasp the facts of this. We often talk in rhetoric on either side, but we don't grasp the facts, right? For example, when Mayor Giuliani says that black men are almost never killed by police, it doesn't happen, well, that's just not true. So what we know is, the Washington Post data says that there have been 512 people who have been shot and killed by the police this year, in 2016. 123 of them have been black. That is a dead black person almost every single day this year. What we also know is, while we love and respect our police officers, we don't want any of them to be killed, that they are not that often killed in the line of duty. They are killed once a week. An officer is killed, which is a tragedy, once a week. 3 times a day, a police officer takes the life of an American citizen. And when we start to have this conversation about black-on-black crime or murder, we conflate two things, because a criminal killing someone is not the same as the state, the government, a police officer killing someone.
One of the reasons, John, that there's still the mistrust is because I think what the community is waiting for is 2 things. Number one, they understand that the rule of law applies to them. They break the law, they're going to be arrested. When there's that black-on-black crime, if they catch the so-called black-on-black crime and they catch the perpetrator, that perpetrator is going to be prosecuted and going to go to jail. What they want to know is that when a police officer takes a life in a way that is unlawful, that police officer will also face accountability and face the rule of law. And I think too often, what we have seen is, right now we're in Baltimore in the middle of these trials. Somebody's responsible for breaking the spine and the voice box of Freddie Gray, who was in that van, and thus far no one has been held responsible. So one piece is accountability. The second piece is ownership of the problem. And ownership of the problem cannot simply fall on African Americans. It's interesting that, we were listening to Mayor Rudy Giuliani, because he's one of the people who, no matter what police officers did, always defended them. We see this with the spokespersons for police unions. We need that when something goes wrong, we want to hear from police officers. We take responsibility for the fact that something went wrong, that one of our people did something wrong, so that we can come together and talk. In the same way we're asked to take responsibility when people in our community commit crimes.
Chief Cunningham, the Burlington police chief said one of the worries cops have is no cop can control what another cop does, but all cops will be judged by what the other cop does. Does this, when we see what happened in Louisiana and in Minnesota, talk a little bit about what that does to just normal police work for cops who are just trying to do their job?
So first I would ask that people not rush to judgment on those 2 incidents, because we haven't seen the full investigation yet. And unfortunately, those videotapes that we see are just a snippet and a snapshot in time, so I'd wait for the investigation to come out. I do think that this is a very difficult thing for the police to deal with. I would like to, John, just for 1 second, go back and talk about the collection of data in police shootings, because I think that's really important. First of all, I think it's an embarrassment to our profession that we have to rely on the media to collect that data. The IACP, with all of our partners and stakeholders, have been working with the FBI to come up to develop a platform so that we can capture that data. That is our data. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should be able to look at it. We should be able to aggregate it, take a deep cut into it, and to see what it means, whether or not we need to change our training, whether or not we need to adapt our technologies and our equipment, whatever it may be. But it's an embarrassment that we don't have that data ourselves to deal with. And I do think that with the shootings that we see out there, we need to hold our officers accountable. There's absolutely no question about it. And I think that Michelle just said, hey, police administrators need to say, you know what, there are bad cops. I'm not talking about Louisiana and Minnesota, because I don't want to rush to judgment there yet. But there are bad cops, and police administrators need to hold those people accountable.
All right, Chief Cunningham, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you.
All right, I thought that was a pretty good segment and reasonable, given the fact that it was in opposition to Rudy Giuliani. All right, so now I'm going to jump to, I guess I'll jump to NBC and Meet the Press, or actually it's on MSNBC. 1 second. Okay, here's the MSNBC take on this situation.
Better introductions for Michael Gerson, former speechwriter for President George W. Bush, now a Washington Post columnist. Michael Eric Dyson of Georgetown University and an MSNBC contributor. Longtime Republican strategist Mary Madeline, a former advisor to Vice President Cheney and the first President Bush, and Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the Washington Post. All right, we got all your accolades out. Michael, let me start with you. You perhaps wrote the most provocative piece of the week of everybody at this table. Not to say that everybody here isn't provocative in their own ways. Right. And yours was addressed to the white community as a whole about this week. Explain.
Well, my point is that, look, and I understand white brothers and sisters will be back, hey, you can't characterize all of us. Look, it's a trope. It's an approach. It's an understanding. But imagine what we feel when we're addressed as Black America. I was pleading, really, with white brothers and sisters to understand the difficulty, the circumstances that we confront, the extraordinary assault upon Black life, the repudiation of any sense of civility when it comes to the interactions between police forces, which most African American people regard with respect and authority, but whose authority has spilled over into terrorizing impulses and impacts upon African American culture. And I wanted to talk about the vulnerability we feel. Even when you were interviewing Chief Bratton, a remarkable man to be sure, but he wanted to draw a false equivalence between talking to his son and Jay Johnson speaking to his son. Jay Johnson, unfortunately, hesitant to weigh in, and I understand. Chief Bratton more than happy to do so. There's not an equivalence between Chief Bratton speaking to his son because his son is not most likely to be brutalized by police authority or the misapplication of the law to vulnerable populations. And I wanted to express myself to that very America that I teach every day at Georgetown University.
I'm going to throw something out here. This was on Red State. Red State, a news and opinion site. Leon Wolf, and he writes this. The most important safety valve to prevent violence like we saw in Dallas last night is the belief that when officers do go off the rails, the legal system will punish them accordingly. If minority communities, and everyone else for that matter, believe that, then the resort to reprisal killings would be either non-existent or far less frequent.
Well, no, I saw that piece on Red State, and after my jaw came off the floor, I was actually encouraged. I was encouraged by that. I was also encouraged by a somewhat lukewarm statement that came out from the National Rifle Association about the Minnesota shooting, which essentially questioned whether Philando Castile was killed for exercising a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And it is encouraging if there are conservatives who are kind of getting it, who are understanding this idea of equal protection. But I have to say, as Michael said, this is personal. I'm a father of two sons, right? And they are often guilty of, they're young Black men, they're often guilty of driving while Black, walking while Black, standing while Black, and so this is a very personal concern.
Mary, you were
You don't like to be lumped together. Conservatives don't like to be lumped together. And a lot of conservatives do get it, particularly conservatives that live in majority cities. And I'm all about Leon Wolf. He's my go-to guy. And he's consistent in saying, if you read the whole column, the problem here is coming to the truth. It's not, and the truth is not all cops are racist, and the truth is not all cops are always right. The truth, as your former panelist said, and the statistics show, is somewhere in between. That's what Leon is saying, and that's what people of good faith believe. And if you live in New Orleans or any city like that, we have faced this, and we have reformed, and we have corrected it. But I want to go to your point, too. It is true that I'm 63, okay, so I'm older than all you guys. I was raised to respect police officers. Black friends of mine whose parents were raised in the same era were taught to fear them because that was the legacy of police brutality and Jim Crow. So of course we have to understand that, but then in turn, and here's what we've done in New Orleans, Black people, our African American brothers and sisters and neighbors, understand that their first line of protection in those neighborhoods are the police.
Exactly. No one understands that more. Nobody understands that more than people who live in poor respect.
And look at Philando Castile. He's announcing, his girlfriend is announcing, look, I have a gun. Let me tell you exactly what I have, as far as we know. And this is the case, and he still, by obeying the law, Mary, lost his life. This is the very pulverizing and brutalizing vulnerability that we feel that we're trying to express to white Americans who love and appreciate justice. Do you understand how difficult that is?
I understand the fear, I understand the legacy, but do you honestly believe out of the 3 million interactions of police with people of all colors, there's one cop for every 266 humans, that every one of these instances that police go out and say, I'm going to brutalize a black man?
Of course not.
Okay.
It's the consequence. And you're making my point for me. It is an unconscious, if you will, inclination to see that black person differently, through a different prism, to have greater fear. The police, the cop on the front line, feels a kind of intensity that he does not feel. Let me give you an example. On the internet right now is a white guy going ham, crazy, beating up, striking out with a machete, and the white police allow him to leave the door of the establishment, and people say, blow the doors. And these are two cops who could have killed him. Do you think that an African-American person wielding a machete would have been granted that kind of civility?
Michael, come in.
Yeah, I think we're discovering more broadly that our biggest need at this moment is empathy across our deepest divisions. That's what allows a diverse country, a multi-ethnic country, to be peaceful and unified. And empathy is most powerful, most effective when you apply it to your own, when you apply it to your own community. So it's powerful when Black Lives Matters empathizes with the role of police officers. It's powerful when people in the white community understand that minorities experience our justice system different than we do, and in ways that we would not tolerate. And so I think that that's the biggest need right now.
I was just going to say, and the cruelest irony of what happened last week is that sort of empathy was happening in Dallas, right?
All police departments.
Of all police departments, David Brown has done a fabulous job in Dallas. Complaints of excessive violence on the part of officers are down by 2/3 since he took over in 2010. Police shootings went down from 23 in 2012 to 1 this year. So it can be done. And you saw the ease with which the protesters, the Black Lives Matter protesters, and the police coexisted until this lunatic went off.
And they were defending the right of those African-American people. I spoke for the Black Police League down in Dallas with Cletus Judge and Willie Ford and Jackie Lee, and those people are remarkable, but they understand. Let me tell you something you don't want to hear. As Black police, they say too, when I'm out of uniform, I have fear. When I am not involved directly and people can't identify me as a cop, I too have fear. Look at the young woman. Is it Nakia Jones, the woman who made the Facebook posting? This is a real thing that we have to confront.
Professor, we got that point. I want to speak to Mike's point, and I know, I get it.
Justice.
Empathy with justice, but starts with empathy, and justice is more frequently done than we're discussing. But let's talk about the aftermath of Baton Rouge. Both my daughters are there. James, my husband's entire family is there. That city came together, black and white, holding vigils, praying and singing and not erupting. That's where the rhetoric departs from the empathy that's lived on the ground.
I want to pause the conversation. We'll continue it.
Well, actually, I don't believe that they continued it, but I'm going to see if I can. I'm going to pause this, and I believe that they didn't actually continue it. Okay, I was wrong. They did continue it somewhat in a vein, basically, of who's best suited to try to solve this problem.
Back now with the panel, I want to pivot the conversation. And Michael Gerson, I'm going to start with you because you had a very provocative column this week too, but yours was on the lamenting the fact, essentially, we're in this moment and we have two nominees that may be uniquely unfit to meet the moment.
Yeah, you'd think political parties would want to pick popular candidates, and in fact, they've chosen two deeply divisive candidates here. And there are elements in our politics, not these two people necessarily, although maybe one, elements in our politics that want to feed just enough anger, just enough resentment, but not over into violence. And that is the most dangerous game that you can possibly play in politics. We have a Republican nominee who rose to prominence by criticizing the other, creating fear of the other. We have a conservative media in parts right now that has a white identity message. Okay, and that all of this is deep.
Said about Trump, but also, you know, the situation, as you said, is that half the country just tunes out when Hillary Clinton speaks. The other half of the country tunes out when Donald Trump speaks, maybe more than half. And so that's not conducive to a national conversation about race, although, frankly, I have always maintained that this is how we have our national conversation about race. Not the way we're sitting at this table, but something happens, we yell and scream, we argue, we get scratchy, but that's the way we look at it.
Wait, stop. Everything isn't about race, or everything is about the economy, which affects every race, every gender, every orientation the same. Donald Trump did not come out of the head of Zeus, okay? The party created him by being unresponsive to the party's demands in the successive tsunami midterms, which wanted to have some sort of reform repeal of Obamacare, wanted to reduce the overreach of government, wanted a more robust economic recovery, wanted a cessation of the intrusion into their life by all these regulations. That's what's going on in every community out there, and Donald Trump is just riding that wave. And you're not wrong about there being, but their rhetoric of both of them is detached. That's not how people live.
The whole political strategy of getting out the white vote is morally problematic and very dangerous. And that's where our politics is headed.
But hold on, so it is about race. So when you say hold on, it's not about race, of course it is. It's just not about blackness, it's also about whiteness. And we don't have a conversation in this country with race and whiteness. Whiteness is at stake. Donald Trump has, I think, in a beguiling way, seduced many working class white people into believing that he will be their defender when indeed he is not. And on top of that, Hillary Clinton, when we get past the optics and cosmetics, has put forth consistently public policy recommendations that will speak to the vicious undercurrent of racism in this country, but also bring together various constituencies along the continuum of race in this country.
Right,
I think that's what's important.
But Gene, how does she do? It goes back to, see, I think that's what Cory Booker was trying to get at. Senator Booker was trying to get at, which is, you know, he says, well, she's doing all of these things, but the country's going to tune her out.
Well,
right? Half of the country, the whole point of unity is, can you get 10% of the other side to listen to you?
Yeah, well, you know, frankly, we'll have to see. I mean, elections are choices, right? And so we're going to have presumably these two candidates, unless something crazy happens in Cleveland. We'll have Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and people will then be making choices, and they will choose who to listen to. And there will be occasions when people basically don't have a choice. They turn off the TV, but the two will be standing there debating. I do believe that there's a very good chance that Hillary Clinton's message will indeed get through better than Donald Trump's.
Very quickly, Michael Eric Dyson, President Obama said he's going to go to Dallas.
Yeah.
Is that the only place he should go this week?
Not at all. I think the president is doing a remarkable and good thing by going to Dallas, but he's got to go to Louisiana and he's got to go to Minnesota. He doesn't have to wait for
all three stops.
You got to do all three stops because all three people are aggrieved, hurt, pained, and he is the president of everybody. He doesn't have to wait for a Delta flight. Thank God. He's got Air Force One.
His own plane.
And I think he can do it. I think he's up to it, and I think he will do it.
All right. We shall see. Back and forth.
All right, so that's the tone that was on NBC. Now let's jump to ABC and see how they saw this. All right, this is the ABC commentary this week with George Stephanopoulos. Unfortunately, George wasn't there today, so I don't think this segment is as good as it could have been.
Sometimes I want to believe that we have made much more progress. I think if we're not standing still, I think sometimes we're sliding back.
America is not as divided as some have suggested. When we start suggesting that somehow there's this enormous polarization and we're back to the situation in the 60s, that's just not true.
Civil rights icon John Lewis and President Obama, two African-American leaders from two different generations, each with very different opinions about where this country is at this moment. So who is right? Here to take that on, Nightline co-anchor Byron Pitts. Presidential historian Doris Kearns-Goodwin, ABC News senior legal correspondent Sunny Hostin, and ABC News political analyst Matthew Dowd. Thanks all of you for coming on this sad period in our history. And Byron, I want to start with you. People are angry, people are frustrated. We've seen both of these horrific events this week. You've been around the country, you've been around Dallas this weekend, talking to protesters, talking to police. What is going on?
All those emotions are true. I think it's also about perspective, where you stand. If you live in West Baltimore, if you live in Ferguson, people are angry, they're scared, they're frightened. If you're in law enforcement, some of those same emotions, but also great sadness right now. There's a powerful moment here a couple of nights ago. A police officer, Dallas police officer, is walking around, and these two little Hispanic girls walked over to hug her and talk to her. Wonderful moment. And then suddenly the police officer started weeping. This whole space went dead quiet. So people are many things, but deeply sad and scared.
And Doris, give us some historical context here. You just heard John Lewis, you just heard President Obama. Are we slipping backward or not?
I think I agree with John Lewis that it's not 1968, but what's so heartbreaking as an historian is when you look at that Kerner Commission report that said we are moving into two societies, one black, one white, one separate but unequal. The whole potent mix that produced those riots in 67 and 68 is still there. And that's what's so sad as an historian. You'd think you want to learn from the struggles and the triumphs of the people who went before, but they talked about racism, they talked about joblessness, they talked about hopelessness in those inner city communities. And I think what scares me most is that in a democracy, it's so essential that people from different sections and castes and races can see and feel each other and have fellow feeling and empathy. And that's what we're missing right now. And Teddy Roosevelt said you can't have a democracy if people don't understand each other's points of view. So somehow that feeling, it's not just knowing, it's feeling what it's like to be a black vulnerable to a policeman, feeling what it's like to be a white policeman vulnerable to feeling that something's going to happen in their situation.
And Sunny, one of the things about this week is in such rapid succession. We had two African-American men killed at the hands of police officers, and then this horrific shooting here. Do you think that brings people together and obviously puts a focus on these issues?
Well, I hope so. I hope that we can have collective outrage now, because what I've been seeing is selective outrage. When you have two African-American men shot within one day of each other by police, the African-American community was outraged, but I didn't see that outrage in the white community or in the police community, quite frankly. Now you see a lot of outrage because 5 officers were tragically gunned down, but also selective outrage. So perhaps we can have this conversation collectively and grasp at that collective outrage and move forward and do something about it. We've been divided on this issue for far too long. It's time for us to come together and try to figure out some way to move forward cohesively.
And Matt, you too have traveled across the country, you've talked to voters, you've talked to people, you live in Texas. You're also covering the presidential campaign, and when you look at two leading candidates in both parties who have such very high unfavorability ratings, what does that mean? How does one of them bring the country together?
Well, I think it's very difficult at this moment, but it is possible. I don't know if they have the capacity in themselves to do it. I disagree with what the president said, which is I do think we have incredible divisions in this country, incredible divisions. And what we've seen over the last few days is an example or a symbol of how many divisions there are, how one part of America has a difficult time looking across the other part of America and seeing it. And I think what unfolded here is an example of some of the worst things in Texas, some of the worst things that we think, but also some of the best things about the state. You know, we're to the left of us in front of the Dallas Police headquarters is a Lone Star flag, which really is supposed to be a symbol of unity, one star above all, over everybody. In the course of this, I think the American public actually is further ahead. Byron and I were talking about this, further ahead than our leaders are in this time. I think our leaders haven't been doing enough to appeal to the unity of the country. Much of it, what they've said, the rhetoric they've used and the actions they've taken has actually divided the country more than it's united.
Well, Sonny, let's talk about something that Donald Trump this week. He said he was, some people were surprised and kind of complimentary about Donald Trump's statement on Friday after Dallas. He mentioned the killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, calling the killings senseless. Do you think he had the right tone?
I think his tone was right, but I think it came a bit too late. I think Donald Trump was silent when we heard about Alton Sterling. He was silent when we heard about Philando Castile. We only heard from Donald Trump after the murder of 5 police officers. And so again, we're talking about selective outrage and not collective outrage. And to be clear, what happened here in Dallas with these police officers is tragic. But the fact of the matter is that anti-police violence is at an all-time low, whereas the shooting of African-American men by police is up 6%. And so there are real legitimate issues within the African-American community that have not been addressed by politicians and certainly haven't been addressed by Donald Trump.
Martha, I think I'm no supporter of Donald Trump, and I think he's been, in many ways, been incredibly divisive in this country. He did make the right statement in the aftermath of the 5 police officers. Should he have said something earlier in the other incidents that happened? Absolutely. But I think part of what we have to do is let people evolve and try to grow, and not every time they do something say, oh, wait a sec, they should have done X, Y, and Z. I think he should have, but I think actually he did the right thing in the aftermath, and so I think let's push him further along that path as opposed to dividing us again.
And Doris, yeah. The problem for us is that we do have an all-time low of trust in politicians. I mean, I saw some survey that they were way down at the bottom. Below them were lobbyists, and above them were telemarketers. And in a democracy, that's a real problem. Politicians used to be an honorable vocation. If we untrust our politicians or distrust them so much, are our best people not going to go into public life? I mean, we're looking now at 2 politicians running for the president who have the least trustworthy statistics in history. And what does that say about a country that we have to look to them to lead us?
And Byron, as the campaign kicks up, we've got the conventions coming up, is there going to be more unity? What do you expect when you see the convention in Cleveland, the convention in Philadelphia?
Well, certainly as journalists, we are preparing for trouble. That seems to be the direction we're heading in. It's difficult. I mean, we're talking about sort of leadership. It seems like we're in a difficult moment, so we need greatness. So a better than usual comment for Donald Trump perhaps doesn't do much. The issues with Hillary Clinton not being trusted. People are angry and frustrated. Now, I would disagree with the point about, again, it's all about perspective.
What about Hillary Clinton's comment? General Flynn brought this up. It was critical of her, saying white people don't understand.
For people I talk to, still both small. These are big issues and people are making small statements. This point earlier about, this isn't, I think America is seeing the tension, but these tensions have existed in urban America for a long time. People aren't just getting angry, they've been angry for a long time. Now because of what happened in Dallas, other people now are beginning to recognize that anger.
And I think because of the video cameras, we feel what's happening. Yes. Words never had told us before how much of this was going on for such a long period of time. I mean, the interesting thing is in World War II, when we finally saw in 1943, 2 years after Pearl Harbor, the first dead soldiers were on a beach, then people suddenly understood the sacrifices that people were making. It used to be censored that you shouldn't see dead people. Finally, Franklin Roosevelt realized the home front wasn't realizing the sacrifices enough, so he allowed that picture, that iconic picture, to be shown. And now we saw these people dying on Facebook. It means you feel this tension now, which has always been there, but maybe there's a visceral level.
And politicians are using that as well, in ways never before.
You know, politicians most of the time follow where the country's going, and I think in this case maybe somebody will emerge that will follow where the country wants us to lead. I think a huge part of the problem that our leaders have is they can't even agree on a common set of facts.
Exactly so.
They can't even agree to say that so it's okay to take different positions, but agree to a common set of facts. So when we have things like this happen, what's really the problem? What's going on in the criminal justice system? What's to do with guns? You have to agree to a common set of facts, and we don't have that today. And my worry, when you don't have that, democracy is broken.
And Byron, I just want very quickly, if you will, personal reflections. You have a 23-year-old daughter. What do you tell her?
We're talking about the talk. Black folk have been having the talk since 1619, the day we African slaves arrived in this country. I tell her how she should carry herself. I tell her to be responsible. And I also tell her what Congressman John Lewis has said, again, about perspective. We aren't where we should be, but America is in a much better place than it was when I was 23 years old.
But can I add to
yes.
Can I add to that?
10 seconds.
I'd like people to think about it this way. I'm a risk-averse parent. The top cause, the leading cause of death for children under 5 is drowning. I taught my kids how to swim. My kid, my black son, can die by the hands of the police at a 2.5 times greater rate. I have to teach him how to swim in that environment. That's not the same discussion that white parents have with their children.
Okay, thank you all so much for your insight, and thank you so much for joining us here in Dallas.
All right, so that's the ABC take. Now let's jump to the Fox take. And let me warn you, as in the previous videos that you've just viewed from CBS, NBC, and ABC, each guest speaker, I guess, spoke at least once, if not twice, in some cases 3 times. That's how much time each of those networks gave to their panelists. I want you to pay close attention to how much time Fox gives to this issue. And again, I want you to pay attention to how much time and how many people on their panel get to weigh in on these issues.
And it is time now for our Sunday group, Fox News senior political analyst Britt Hume, Susan Page from USA Today, GOP strategist Karl Rove, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Welcome to you all. Juan, where are we right now? Have things gotten better? Are they getting worse?
Well, obviously, I mean, I think, the fact that I'm sitting here as part of this panel, I don't think my dad would be here. So we're talking, over 50 years. Depends where you want to judge it, Shannon. But I think at this moment, I just feel so sad. I mean, I think the whole country's sort of grieving right now after Dallas, and especially after watching those 2 videos from Minnesota and Louisiana, because the social media kind of takes you right into it. And even in Dallas, the social media watching the police have to deal, and a man standing over a policeman and shooting repeatedly in that manner, that kind of hatred, it just shocks the system, and it makes you think, gosh, race in this country, as you suggested by your question, we're in a bad place. And so the question is, how do you stop this cycle of violence and hate? How do we get out of it? I think we've had some, I just want to say from my perspective, to hear Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, say, you know what, we can do better than this, and we cannot just step into the predictable script of saying, oh, hatred and pointing fingers. I thought that was so important. I thought it was so important for Newt Gingrich to come out this week and say so many white people don't understand the added risk that comes with being black and being stopped by police in this country. I was very appreciative to hear that and to move away, even by Donald Trump, from the idea, oh, I'm going to blame the other side and I'm going to make this into a racial situation.
And we asked folks to write in to be part of this discussion today. On Twitter, Richard Hurd says, why are race relations in America at an all-time low? After electing our first ever black president, seems they would be better. Jay Wheeler asks which candidate would have a better shot at healing the racial divide. And John Ferguson on Facebook says, how do you get black males to trust police and vice versa? Carl, where do we go from here?
Well, I'm not certain, but I know one place we shouldn't go, and that is not turn this into a debate about gun control. I was taken aback that G.K. Butterfield, the head of the Congressional Black Caucus, after Castillo and Sterling lost their lives, his immediate response was to say, if we fail to act and have a full debate on gun control, this will be a long, hot summer. Well, the only kind of gun control issue that was involved in the deaths of Sterling and Castillo was the guns in the hands of the police. And so unless the argument is we ought to disarm the police, this is not connected with gun control. There's no gun measure that has been, nobody is saying, let's take away everybody's gun. There's no gun measure that's been proposed that would have kept these incidents from happening. I would say this. First of all, I agree with Juan about Newt Gingrich and particularly Paul Ryan. And I also want to thank you for what you said. I happened to catch what you said about which is something I think every American needs to understand. You having to have a conversation with your 2 sons about what to do if they came into contact with police officers. And I don't want to be overly critical of the president, but when he said it's very hard to untangle the motives of the shooter, I'll leave that to psychologists and people who study these kinds of incidents. It would have been far better for this dialogue that we need to have if he said, a man who declares his intention to kill white people, especially white police officers, is a man engaged in evil. And you cannot confront something unless you're willing to call it by its name.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time for this panel, but much...
Right, so basically, they gave this particular segment 4 minutes and only allowed 2 people to speak on it. So that really just tells you how committed Fox is to actually discussing a problem and getting proper insight.